I request panel, the last panel, session 7, to please come up on the stage. In the next session, we have His Excellency Ambassador Hideki Asari, who has come to us all the way from Delhi. He is the Minister for Political Affairs in the Japanese Embassy at Delhi. And he is very well conversant with the subject that he will be dealing with. We also have Captain Gurmeet Khurana from the Naval Maritime Foundation. He is a serving officer. It's rare for a serving officer to come in and address such sessions, but he's been kind enough to deal with it. And just for the information of everybody present here, there is a Calcutta chapter of Naval Maritime Foundation also being established over here, where MS Daryanani, am I right? Daryanani is going to be the representative over here. Of course, chairing the session is our very own member, Vice Admiral P.K. Chatterjee, the former CNC, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And there's nothing that he does not know about what has been spoken about, and as far as the sea warfare is concerned, he is a member, a very eminent member of SNSK. I will just request the chairman for the timing to be this thing, because there is a 30 to 40 minutes interaction. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's always difficult towards the end, and because some of you may like to doze off at this time, the last session. But let me assure you that we'll try and make it as interesting as possible. My next thing is, I wouldn't like to take the wind off the sails of my speakers, so I would like them to speak first. And if there are any grounds which are not covered, I will cover them in the end. The topic is changing balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, security challenges and strategic partnerships. If you go individually into the topics of both the speakers, you would feel that they are geographically isolated by several longitudes, but it's not so. It's on the surface of a seamless water. So please, without further ado, may I request Ambassador Hideki Asari. He is a career diplomat and started as early as 1986, has participated in several bilateral and trilateral negotiations, and he's also been a teacher. So without further ado, may I request you to take the podium.
Thank you, Admiral Chatterjee. Thank you very much, General Roy. Well, actually, thank you very much, General Roy, for promoting to ambassador. Actually, I'm a minister and political director of Embassy of Japan, but he kindly promoted me to ambassador today. And also, I thank you for, I thank him and his staff correctly spelling my name, Asari, A-S-A-R-I. Oftentimes, the organizer of seminar spell my name Ansari, Indian name, but my name is Asari. Thank you very much. Very much privileged and honored to speak at this distinguished seminar under a very timely overarching topic, which is India-China relations, resolving contentious issues. At first, the organizer asked me if I could speak on the Quad. That's why I think on this one, my presentation topic is still the Quad. But actually, I wanted to speak, I would like to put my presentation in a more broader perspective. And that is why I slightly changed my presentation topic, which is reflected actually in this, my abstract, which is the Indo-Pacific, Japan and India as leading partners. Admiral Chatterjee is right that India and Japan are separated quite miles and miles of distance, but connected by the seamless body of water. And so, I'd like to discuss about a wide-ranging strategic partnership between Japan and India in the current context of this seamless body of water in the Pacific. So in my presentation, I'd like to touch upon 3 points in line with the session topic. First, I'd like to examine the changing power dynamic of the Indo-Pacific. And second, I would like to share with you my views on the security challenges of this region. And then I would like to discuss strategic partnership as vehicles to address such challenges. And I would also like to discuss forging stable and constructive relations with China too, referring to the recent visit of Foreign Minister Kono's visit to China. First of all, the changing power dynamic. The Indo-Pacific is relatively new concept, as some speaker already referred to. But in the official context, this notion first appeared in the now famous Prime Minister Abe's speech in the Indian Parliament in 2007, which was titled Confluence of the Two Seas. And in the summer of 2016, this concept was developed into Japan's foreign policy strategy when Prime Minister Abe laid out his free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. You could refer later, right after my abstract, there is a slide which summarizes this strategy. But in a nutshell, this strategy regards the Pacific region and Indian Ocean region as one big strategic domain and aims at making the free and open Indo-Pacific into global commons to secure peace and prosperity of the entire region and beyond. And at the background of this strategy is a growing awareness of the importance of the Indo-Pacific as a whole. The Indo-Pacific is a vast domain that connects Asia, which is an economic powerhouse, and Africa with vast potentials. In particular, Indian Ocean is playing an increasingly important role as a sea of commerce and transport. More specifically, the strategy consists of 3 pillars. First, promotion and establishment of the rule of law and freedom of navigation. Second, pursuit of economic prosperity by improving regional connectivity through quality infrastructure development. And the third, commitment for peace and peace and security. For example, capacity building on maritime law enforcement and cooperation for anti-piracy, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and non-proliferation. Now the concept of Indo-Pacific and the philosophy behind it is becoming common currency. In September last year, our 2 prime ministers, PM Modi and PM Abe, signed a joint statement when PM Abe visited India. Again, right next to this slide, I put this joint statement, which was issued last September. I was engaged in the drafting of this joint statement, and its title, which says, Towards a Free, Open and Prosperous Indo-Pacific. This shows that Japan and India are on the same page in promoting this idea, and the 2 prime ministers agreed to seek deeper synergy between Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy and India's Act East policy. This idea is also subscribed by the United States, for example, as seen in the affirmation by Prime Minister Abe and President Trump at the time of President Trump's visit to Japan last November, that the 2 countries will work together to promote peace and prosperity in the region by developing the Indo-Pacific as free and open. So here, the key words are free and open commons and the rule of law. However, the region is facing a variety of challenges threatening the rule-based order in the region. I will point out 3, among others. First, I'd like to mention North Korea. North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile program poses unprecedented, grave and imminent threat not only to the Northeast Asia, but also to the rest of the world, including India. And we cannot achieve the peace of the region without denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We need to maximize pressure on North Korea by all measures, including the full implementation of UN Security Council resolutions, so as to make North Korea to change its policy. I would also like to mention that North Korea has abducted many Japanese citizens in the 70s and 80s, including a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Prime Minister Abe said in his UN General Assembly address last year, I quote, "I will continue to do all possible efforts so that they can set foot on Japan's soil as soon as possible," end of quotation. We appreciate India's support and understanding of this issue. Second, a free and open maritime order based on the rule of law is under challenge. Despite a repeated call for the implementation of UNCLOS arbitration award, we are yet to see the demilitarization of the disputed feature in the South China Sea. This point was mentioned by several speakers already. Also, there are still dangerous attempts of changing the status quo by force and coercion around Japan's Senkaku Islands near Okinawa. A free and open maritime order based on the rule of law is the foundation of security. With respect to unilateral measures and provocations, it is necessary to use deterrence to stop attempts to change the status quo. And in particular, freedom of navigation is a key in Indo-Pacific, where important sea lanes exist. Third, the Indo-Pacific region also faces challenges of non-traditional security issues such as terrorism. At the time of Prime Minister Abe's visit to India last September, the two Prime Ministers condemned in the strongest terms the growing menace of terrorism and agreed to work together to combat terrorism and violent extremism. Now that I spoke about the security challenges, let me talk about strategic partnership as vehicles to address such challenges. First and foremost, the key to the Indo-Pacific strategy is a partnership with India. India is right at the center of the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific, and we share values such as our commitment to democracy, openness, and rule of law. Japan places importance of upholding the rule of law, and India also values the rule of law, and its adherence to the rule of law in the international arena is worthy of admiration. I recall one speaker refers to India's compliance with the arbitration award of Bay of Bengal demarcation. Equally importantly, Japan and India have will and capacity to protect and strengthen the rule-based order in Indo-Pacific. Japan and India is strengthening synergy between the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and active policy. And let me look at some specific examples of cooperation. First, Japan and India are strengthening security and defense cooperation. For example, Japan and India are closely engaged in strategic dialogues, including leaders level. We also have Vice Minister, Secretary level 2+2, staff talks of 3 services, and various other policy dialogues. And on the ground, all the 3 services and Coast Guards are increasingly engaged. Our Maritime Self-Defense Force and Indian Navy are actively engaged in PASEX and trilateral Malabar exercise. And just recently, we had a very successful bilateral exercise of our 2 Coast Guards off the coast of Chennai. Our Ground Self-Defense Force and Indian Army are considering to hold the first ever joint field exercise on counter-terrorism this year, and the reciprocal visit by air assets by our Air Self-Defense Force and Indian Air Force are also envisaged. All these engagements on the ground, sea and air are useful for both countries in learning from each other and improving their skills in such areas as maritime domain awareness and anti-submarine operations, which are increasingly important in the Indo-Pacific given its current challenges, and also tackling non-traditional issues, threats such as terrorism and piracy. These engagements also send very clear signal that Japan and India are determined to use their capacity to protect the rule-based order. On the diplomatic front too, the two countries are closely cooperating. For example, the two countries are cooperating in such fora as EAS and ARF on maritime security and other important issues. Second, Japan and India are cooperating on improving regional connectivity. While security cooperation aims at ensuring the secure environment for prosperity, the cooperation on connectivity will improve the means of prosperity by facilitating a smoother flow of goods and services, goods and peoples. Japan believes that infrastructure development must be based on principles, and Japan and India are completely in agreement on this point. When providing investment and support for infrastructure projects such as ports, railroads, roads, it is important to develop quality infrastructure in accordance with international standards. Specifically, this means the infrastructure developed must ensure economic efficiency in view of life cycle cost and safety, contribute to local job creation and transfer of expertise, address social environment impact, and ensure financial viability of recipient countries, among others. Furthermore, ensuring openness and transparency in the operation of infrastructure is important. These principles are important to make sure that infrastructure will be truly useful for the regional prosperity and prevent the recipient countries from falling into debt traps. Based on these points, Japan and India are consulting and cooperating on improving connectivity. Japan is already actively contributing to connectivity projects in the Indo-Pacific, including the east-west connectivity of ASEAN countries, as well as India's neighboring countries such as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. India is also carrying out various projects. And the two countries are deepening their connectivity dialogue to see how they can synergize their respective efforts. And in this context, I'd like to also take up the cooperation between Japan and India on India's strategic northeast region. In December last year, the India-Japan Act East Forum was inaugurated between the two countries to advance cooperation in this regard. So in this way, Japan and India are closely working together for the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific, and there are more to come. While Japan and India play important roles, leading roles, they cannot, of course, achieve free and open Indo-Pacific alone. To make the Indo-Pacific as a free and open commons, we need to work with other stakeholders. The most important such partner is the United States. US is by far the most powerful country in the world, but it is not only powerful but also shares fundamental values with Japan and India, and has been playing a central role in safeguarding the rule-based order for more than 70 years. Japan-US alliance is the cornerstone of peace and prosperity and freedom of the region. And just as Prime Minister Abe and President Trump has established very strong trust and relationship, there is mutual trust and affinity between PM Modi and President Trump. And together, the three countries can lead roles of the guardians of peace and prosperity of the region. We've been cooperating on the policy level, including foreign trilateral dialogue, including foreign minister level. However, the most salient example of trilateral cooperation may be the Malabar exercise by Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force and Indian and US Navy. I went to last year's exercise off the coast of Chennai and had a chance to board the USS Nimitz with my US and Indian counterparts after experiencing the so-called arrested landing, which was pretty challenging. The last year's Malabar exercise was participated by 16 surface ships, including Japan's largest helicopter destroyer and Indian and US carriers, and 2 submarines and more than 95 airplanes, the largest ever. This sent an unmistakable signal to the rest of the world that the three countries are committed to the free and open Indo-Pacific. Australia is also an important partner. As a director in charge, I was involved in drafting of Japan-Australia Security Cooperation Declaration in 2007. It is all too natural that the four such countries, Japan, India, US and Australia, which shares the commitment to the rule-based order, have dialogue and advanced cooperation. The DG level meeting in November last year was successful in that the four countries reaffirmed their commitment to rule-based order and discussed measures to ensure such an order. They decided to continue discussions and deepen cooperation. Japan and India are also keen on working with other partners, including, most importantly, ASEAN countries. I think the previous session was on ASEAN, and I heard the discussion with great interest. The ASEAN unity and centrality have been the key factors that have driven the regional integration and the strengthening of regional architecture, such as EAS. However, the unity and centrality are under challenge, and I recall one of the speakers in previous session refers to the fact that South China issue did affect ASEAN centrality and unity. Both Japan and India are committed to ASEAN centrality and unity. Japan has long been a catalyst of ASEAN regional integration and its remarkable economic success, and will continue to do so. And I would also like to congratulate India for the successful India-ASEAN Summit and Republic Day event last month. Well, some media like to portray our strategy and partnership as something directed against a particular country, but this is not really the case at all. In fact, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy is open to all countries that agree with this vision. At the same time, we must raise our voice together and confront initiatives that prevent the Indo-Pacific from being free and open to whichever countries such initiatives belong. Here again, the keywords are free and open, commons, and the rule of law. Now that my presentation is approaching to the end, let me touch upon our relation with China. China is an important neighbor for both Japan and India. India shares 2,000 kilometers land border with China, while East China Sea is in a way border area. Given the respective powers and clouds of the three countries, Japan and India having stable and constructive relations with China is a benefit for the stability of the region. At the same time, both Japan and India are deeply committed to the rule of law. Last month, Foreign Minister Kono, in his foreign policy speech to the Japanese Parliament, stressed the importance of building stable relations with China. He pointed out that Japan and China share responsibility to cooperate in various issues of a region and the world. He also stated that Japan would strengthen its relation with China based on the concept of a mutually beneficial relationship based on common strategic interest, which was agreed in 2007. At the same time, he stated in his policy speech that Japan would never allow attempts to unilaterally change the status quo in East China Sea, and act calmly and firmly that Japan would continue discussion with China to make the East China Sea the sea of peace, cooperation, and friendship. Based on this basic stance, Foreign Minister Kono visited China from the 27th to 29th January. The visit was successful and fruitful, and the Foreign Minister stated that visit will create a momentum to further development of Japan-China relations, and that Japan would like to develop these relations while making clear its principled position. We understand that India is also working hard to build stable and constructive relations with China while keeping principled position on the rule of law. So these will continue to be an important factor in the international relations in the Indo-Pacific in years to come. So in closing, Let me quote a passage from Prime Minister Abe's speech in Indian Parliament I referred to at the beginning of my presentation, where he stressed the important roles of Japan and India. I quote, "The Pacific and Indian Oceans are now bringing about the dynamic coupling of the seas of freedom and prosperity. Our two countries have the ability and the responsibility to ensure that it broadens yet further and to nurture and enrich these seas to become seas of clearest transparency." End of quotation. 10 years from his foresightful speech, the case for Japan and India partnership is stronger than ever. The two countries must work together, along with other countries, to make our Indo-Pacific truly free, open, and prosperous. And I thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Captain Gurpreet Khurana. He is a missile warfare officer, a PhD in defense studies and analysis. He has authored 60 papers and 2 books. Interestingly, it was this gentleman who was the first to coin the word Indo-Pacific. And as just mentioned by the previous speaker, it was as the Prime Minister had just used it after it was discussed in the intra-IDSA meeting with the Japanese, and where Khurana was present, and he was the first to coin this word of Indo-Pacific. And I think the New York Times, etc., had contacted him to verify whether he was the first or not. So over to Captain Khurana. He is going to speak on China's Indian Ocean power play from Gwadar to Djibouti, and what are India's strategic choices. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to General Roy and Sena's Care for having me here. And thank you all for giving your time to listen to me. And it's an honor to be with the same guys as Admiral Chatterjee and Asani sir. Let me begin by saying that India's China policy is dual track. We are following a dual track approach, engaging with them and as well as keeping our powder dry, which is a prudent thing to do, and we must continue this, including enhancing economic engagement and so on. But we cannot really brush it under the carpet, the fact that India and China do have an adversarial potential due to various reasons, and we've all gone through it, and I will not reiterate. Now, until about a decade ago, the India-China interface geographically, in geographical sense, was limited to the land border. And 10 years back, since then, the Chinese are onward to the ocean. Now, with the kind of adversarial relations that the two countries have, with an emerging superpower becoming your maritime neighbor, I think that is the import, the implication of this development we in India have not been able to fathom so far. And the reason, the primary reason for that is the fact that we in India, our maritime awareness is not much, which is the fact, and there are reasons, historical reasons for that. So, so the conferences like this are very important, and I really compliment the organizers for bringing this out in this. So essentially, the statement of problem itself has not been identified. To start with, why are the Chinese in the Indian Ocean in the first place? So you see, this is what I wanted to show you. Just a slide to show you that the Chinese are doing everything, from the hospital ship to the anti-piracy, and this is started about a decade ago. And the fact that we are not very clear about what is the implication, we are in such a situation. All of us are trying to see what it is from our own perspective. like the blind men of Hindustan. And to complicate matters further, we try to assess the Chinese dragon, which is even more non-transparent, opaque, and there are linguistic and cultural barriers for us to understand the Chinese. So, we need to understand this problem in its entirety as a sort of a net assessment. But before that, let me first make some concepts clear, because communication is very important. What I want to tell you, I cannot tell you. An English language is not enough. And so, the prefix geo refers to a country's strategic geography, the core spatial context underpinning its national objective and therefore its national strategy. So geopolitics and geoeconomics are should not be seen in different silos. Geoeconomics is very much a part of geopolitics, and this is what I want to say. And the plan, the overarching national plans to achieve it, we call it geostrategy, which could be, and they can be, the sets may be very many, ranging from military strategy to economic strategy to energy security strategy. So this is something which is clear. This is based on the book that I have written, which I have handed over to our regional director in Calcutta. This is Ninu Daryanani, who is sitting there, and I have a soft copy and I can share it with anybody who wants to, that has authoritative sources of these concepts. And this is the most critical thing for us, to be on the same conceptual platform. When you say something, the other person should understand what you say. So now we come to the main chapter, the crux of the presentation. Now these are the things that I want you to first understand. What is China's characteristic thinking? The first is China's worldview and its own position in the world. And we all talked about China's thought about the Middle Kingdom. Now this is the very critical thing which China is, and it's been discussed, so I will not I will labor on it, except to say that the Chinese don't understand the Indians, because Indians was not bordering China in those days, during the Middle Kingdom days. It was Tibet which was on the way. Now, when the Chinese have come all over Tibet, now they've become a next door neighbor. And that is the reason why the Chinese are not being able to understand why the Indians are behaving the manner they are. And this aspect is very closely linked to the extraordinary value that the Chinese place on the face, value of face, and their prestige. Of course, every country has that, but it is much, much more pronounced in case of the Chinese, and the G2 relation that they sought with the Americans is a reflection of that. The second is, they make practical moves devoid of cultural and religious baggage or ideological baggage. If Panchsheel is not serving any purpose for them, they will dump it. And this comes from the Chinese proverb, which says that it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white till the time it catches mice. So, if the Chinese want to give experience to their submariners of Indian Ocean operations, it doesn't matter whether it's a totally suboptimal way of utilizing submarines. They want to do something, they will do that. And submarines against anti-piracy operations, it really flouts the fundamental tenets of naval operations. The third is extremely long time frame for conceptualizing and planning. They have a very long lead time. As Professor Shrikant had mentioned yesterday, that they have a plan of 35 to 50 years, maybe even more. Then is China's geopolitical imperatives. First, geoeconomic interest. If you see on the slide, China has got a big adversity in terms of geography. Its eastern area is so far from the sea, and that is the reason why the Chinese want to be in the Indian Ocean. This is the coast-land ratios, and you see China, it has got one of the least, almost the least of the coast-land ratios of major and little powers. You see China at night in 1992 and 2010, the differential between, it shows the level of development. The differential between the East and the West has increased further in 2010. And then it's dependent on the Indian Ocean sea lines for all its resources. Next. Then the balance of power interests. It's closely related to China's Middle Kingdom syndrome. It needs to dominate Asia and military strategy. A permanent naval presence in the Indian Ocean is critical to attain the status of a global power. And a two-nation navy, it is also important for a strategic distraction of the Americans who are breathing down their necks in the Western Pacific. So when they say that in the Indian Ocean Blue Book that they have and the Maritime Silk Road, it's all about economics. Yes, it's all about economics, but not all. It's actually about geopolitics. Now these are the manifestations of China's power play in the Indian Ocean. It's sort of a colonialism in the opposite direction. It's very much unlike India. When India, the Indian Prime Minister talks about Sagar, he wants everybody to grow together and have security together in tandem. With the Chinese, they are looking at the Indian Ocean merely as a storehouse of resources. And then they are focusing on developing a Chinese narrative in terms of Shang Ho, the Chinese admiral who traveled to Indian Ocean to African ports long back, and so on and so forth. And then their presence, naval presence in the Indian Ocean is increasing. They are using, as I said, they are using submarines, and there's a report that they may be basing nuclear submarines at Gwadar. And military facilities, just show you some slides. This is Djibouti, they have their first base. This is how it looks like, and it's much very fortified and very vast and can hold many marines. What are the marines there for? About 10,000 marines. We don't know, of course. The Chinese are thinking very much ahead. And these are the ports. There's some report that Diwani next to Gwadar may be used by the Chinese, which was not Gwadar especially. This is what the Chinese are doing in Maldives, a 50-year lease to the Chinese company. It is not very far away. It's just 45 minutes through sailboat from the capital Malé. And the Maldives may be giving them the Gadu Island, which is very close to the 1.5 degree channel through which most of the Chinese oil passes. So now you know where you are. In Sri Lanka, they are building a space station. They will probably want to have an awareness of what is going on in the Indian Ocean. And then defense hardware sales. They're giving submarines to, they're already given to Bangladesh, they're giving aid to Pakistan. This will create problems in our region. And then seabed mining. They're there in the Indian Ocean doing seabed mining. Now what are the implications for us? Firstly, geopolitics, geoeconomics, competition for resources of the Indian Ocean region, of course, regional balance of power. Now the Chinese influence in India's backyard will be quite detrimental to India. And Chinese could intervene in the socio-political instability in the Indian Ocean, and India will not have a role to play at all. And in the worst case, an unfavorable balance of power will also impinge directly on India's national security. Just go ahead. Yeah. Now, I showed you this slide again because this is the area which is actually crossing India's area. So when the Chinese ships go to their area, they do intelligence gathering Indian areas while they do so. So now I come to the main topic of what are India's response options. Should we bandwagon with China? Not really. It's not a good idea, because this does not gel with the Chinese psyche, which has drawn from the Middle Kingdom. It says that the job of a supplicant is to supplicate. So, what they are expecting from us, if we do that, is nothing will change. They are the Middle Kingdom. And so the lack of any pushback against China's expanding claims, it will only generate a disdain in Chinese mind. So, can we balance China with a deal with the US? Of course we can, but that involves a very big cost. Remember a few years back when we had asked the US ship to leave Indian waters because it was spying. This is not history. If you feel it's history, see this. The Indian Prime Minister and the US President may talk to each other and they may have a joint statement saying that we love freedom of navigation in accordance with international law. But when it comes to practitioners like us, we know there is a difference between the Indian interpretation of UNCLOS and ours. And freedom of navigation is actually not there. So they are still doing FN operations against India as well. So that is the cost that we have to bear. So this brings us back to the question of nation building, which we talked yesterday, and I will not go into it. We need to build sufficient strategic deterrence against China. We have to industrialize, we have to build up our defense technology. There is no option. And there are reports, a Niti Aayog report, which says that by 2030 we should be in a very fairly good state. So until that time that happens, I think we must keep our option for the US, with the US collective security option open. But then we will have to bear the cost of that we must not forget. And we have to have multi-vectored strategic partnership, which is very clear. And we have to have engagement with the Pacific littorals. My last point, let me come to is, you see, yesterday General Roy Choudhury said that we are in a very favorably placed in terms of our peninsular geography, and we can interdict the Chinese sea lines of communication. And for that, because of our disposition that we have, we may not even need a carrier. Now, this is an aspect which is really very crucial for us to understand. And General Roy Choudhury, I am not too sure, but let me come to these factors, which are very critical when we have to take such a major decision whether we have to have aircraft carrier or not. Firstly, it takes a very long lead time for developing and planning a carrier. It is not only the carrier. You have to have aviation, you have to have its task force around it. India started its first carrier acquired in early 1960s. And it has reached to the level now. If we do not have a carrier, you see the Chinese are very smart. They are planning 100 years ahead. For a naval officer like me, it would look very silly that the Chinese are building a carrier in that part of the world, in the Western Pacific, where carrier is so vulnerable. But they are looking so far ahead, they are looking at the Indian Ocean. And they know if they start now, they will be able to integrate a carrier task force and establish sea control in the Indian Ocean, maybe after 50 years, but they are starting now. So this is something which is very critical. Second, China is not sitting idle, and it will let the Indian Navy interdict its oil stocks. They are also taking measures. There are defensive measures and there are offensive measures. Then if it's a defensive measure, they could reroute their shipping either through the polar way, which was talked about yesterday, or from through anywhere. Will the Indian peninsular disposition help us? No, we would need a carrier. Not only a carrier, you would need a nuclear powered carrier which can give you sufficient endurance to reach the areas where the Chinese oil tankers can possibly go. The second is the offensive issue. If the Indians interdict the Chinese carrier in the Indian Ocean, do you think the Chinese will keep quiet? They will interdict our slocks in the South China Sea. What will you do? Do you have the ability to protect that? No. And for that you need a carrier. Second thing, we are, I will show you a slide. There we are. The Chinese are making sure that all their strategic commodities go on Chinese flag vessels. Why? Because that is where you can escort them. If they do not go on the Chinese flag vessel, the Chinese warships cannot escort them. And see our case. In 1998, 34% of our trade went on Indian flag vessels. Today, 2016, the percentage has dropped to 7.5%. That means most of our strategic commodities are going on foreign flag vessels, which we cannot escort, and hence they are very vulnerable, especially in the South China Sea. So these are some issues that I wanted to tell you. And the last, my last point here is that when you this is the map which is given in the Indian Maritime Security Strategy of 2015. It gives you a primary and secondary areas of interest. But there is a problem here. It does not give you something which deals with traditional military threats. And for that reason, unfortunately, this gives you that, but this cannot be put in an official document. This is the concept of strategic frontiers, where what Air Chief Marshal Anup Raha had talked about yesterday. But it is important for you to understand the concept of strategic frontier. It is focused on a state threat, a state-to-state military threat. It means this is the area where you need to be able to influence events to ensure your national security. It is also an area which gives you strategic depth. So far, India's strategic frontier has coincided with its primary area of interest. But with the Chinese coming into the Indian Ocean in a big way, India needs to expand its strategic frontier, and that is what is happening. When you read the reports of the Indian Navy likely to get a full-fledged base in Seychelles, this is what is happening. And that means India's strategic frontier is expanding southwards and eastwards. And when there is a requirement because slot interdiction strategy alone will not do. The Indian Navy cannot be comfortable with only a single strategy. We need, and this is a study which we did, and we made our China strategy in 2012, where I was involved, and that means that we need to project power on the Chinese littoral, which means in the South China Sea, which means from sea to land in the Chinese land. For that, we cannot possibly establish sea control, and therefore submarines are important. And therefore, you need nuclear submarines, because you have to have that much of power and the ordnance carrying capacity. And 6 submarines have been cleared by the government, nuclear submarines are called SSF. And that, coming back to this is what it means by extending your strategic frontier eastwards. Thank you so much for your attention.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we just got the perspectives of the 2 speakers, and I have been given about 9 minutes, so I'll rush through the issues that have, I think, not been covered adequately. Firstly, what is the genesis of this whole problem of South China Sea and balance and shift of power, etc.? I think they are based on pretty well-known theories. And first is the Modelsky's long cycle theory, which says that the international system always seeks a preeminent power for about whose tenure lasts for about 100 years. It started from the Portuguese in the 16th century, then came the Dutch in the 17th century, and then the British. They had two tenures of almost close to 2 centuries. And now, ever since the Second World War, it's been the American preeminence, which is actually waning. And it is said that by 2050, there is likely to be a change. And who is going to take over is pretty clear as of now, unless there is something drastic which happens in between. And if so, why is this happening? Why is South China Sea suddenly become so important to China? Two basic reasons. Firstly, the South China Sea, on a very moderate scale, has an estimated value of hydrocarbons which are at least 7 times that of Kuwait. Two, of 80% of China's oil, of their consumption is roughly about 570 metric tons a year, moves through the South China Sea. So it is the energy security which is actually the primary cause of whatever is happening in the South China Sea. And the reason is, of course, the irrational way, the black and the white cat, as he said, as long as it does the job, was well delineated in 1982 by Vice Chairman of the Chinese Military Commission, Li Huaqing, who had specified that by 2010 we must get control of the first chain islands, connecting Okinawa and all that down south. The second island chain should be over by 2020, and by 2040 we must end the domination of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. It doesn't say Indo-Pacific, it says Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So this is their stated goals, and they want to take the top slot before the centenary of the Chinese Communist Party, which is say about 2048 or 49. That is, I think, when it was formed. So they have made their aims clearly. Now it is for the rest of us to see what we have to do. Whether to go with them or not to go with them is going to be each and every country's individual choice. I just want to ask you about the formation of this Quad. Firstly, it is still informal. I would like to ask whether all the members of the Quad are likely to go into harm's way if the other is attacked. That's the question you have to ask. So, on one hand, you have business engagements, as you can see. US still has about 16.2% of its bilateral trade with China. Japan has 21.6%, and Australia has an astounding 27.6% of their trade. And yet, they are vociferous about formation of the Quad, as I think 3 or 4 months back in the Eastern EAS, Mr. Trump, Mr. Modi, etc., they had their discussions, and the outcome is not really specified as to what is going to happen. Now, let's move from the east to the west. Now, on one hand, as we just left east, and we said that it is well known that China has got a Malacca dilemma, which was coined by Hu Jintao, because it will get strangled if the Malacca Straits are blocked and Chinese energy won't flow. Now, what is the countervailing force which the Chinese want to do? They are not going to sit idle. 95% of India's oil emanates from the Hormuz. And so, they are going to create a Hormuz dilemma for us. And they already started doing that. You see Djibouti, you see Gwadar, and then you see the CPC, which may not be economically viable, but there could be a formation of another axis, a person who's been wanting to get access to warm water ports since decades, and that is Russia. So there are no permanent friends. It's all permanent interests. So these kind of shifts will happen. Now the other aspect is that it is the center of the universe perception. Now India feels that we are being encircled by China by the string of pearls. But if you wear the Chinese hat, you will realize that they are doing it for their survival and out of their insecurity, because they can be deprived of their entire energy requirements. It must also be seen that on the western seaboard, on an average, there are between 90 to 100 warships of extra-regional forces milling in that area. So that is a very significant area where everybody would like to monitor and see what is happening. And therefore, the Chinese, who are geographically disadvantaged on the other side, would like to have adequate backups and resources so that they could extend the endurance of their ships and have some kind of repair facilities, etc. So this is something which is expected. Now we started developing Chabahar, and Japan also agreed to join us in the development of certain facilities in Chabahar. But what happened next? The Chinese had a strategic MOU with the Iranians. So that has again removed the military value of Chabahar, because Iran will not allow you to use Chabahar militarily, and that is quite evident. So these things will have to happen. So now what are the choices that we have? The choices is that we have to work and make our country strong, because it's only strength that recognizes strength. And we should not mix up business with security. I mean, there is a certain amount of interplay, but as far as possible, we should separate the two, so that business goes on. Because it's like, you look at US and China, it is like two sumo wrestlers hugging each other and with two economic arms, because they are so economically interdependent, that it's going to be very tough for them to tip one over the other. With that, I have finished 38 seconds before my time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.